The old gardeners still speak of him in hushed tones, when the spring roses bloom in the palace gardens of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They say he came from nowhere, this quiet man with soil-stained hands and eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. But I know the truth of Konrad Gärtner, for my grandmother kept his letters until the day she died, and through them, I learned how a simple gardener won the heart of Empress Sophia's Regne. Vienna, 1897. The empire was in its twilight years, though few would admit it. The aging Emperor Franz Joseph maintained his ritual-bound existence while his court swirled around him in a dance of ambition, intrigue, and carefully cultivated appearances. And in the center of it all, isolated by protocol and grief, was the young Empress Sophia. Konrad arrived at Schönbrunn Palace on a rain-soaked April morning. The head gardener, Herr Müller, regarded him with suspicion, noting his gaunt frame and the slight tremor in his left hand. "Your references claim you trained at Kew Gardens in London. Is that true?" "Yes, sir. 5 years under Director Thistleton Dyer." "And before that?" Konrad's eyes darkened. "I served in the Imperial Army. Cavalry Division." Müller nodded, satisfied with the military connection. "Very well. You'll start with the perimeter beds. Nothing near the palace proper until you've proven yourself." As Konrad bowed his acceptance, neither man noticed the pale face watching from a second-story window, the Empress, trapped in her morning ritual of staring out at the garden she rarely walked. For 3 weeks, Konrad worked silently, methodically. The other gardeners found him strange, he spoke little, ate alone, and seemed to commune with the plants in a way they found unsettling. He was particularly attentive to the roses, which had been neglected during the previous gardener's tenure. "They're just flowers," scoffed young Bauer, another gardener. "The nobility barely notices them anyway." "They notice more than you think," Konrad replied quietly. "Especially those who have nowhere else to look." In late April, Konrad was pruning near the eastern wall when he discovered an abandoned garden plot, hidden behind overgrown hedges. Unlike the formal geometric patterns favored throughout Schönbrunn, this small sanctuary appeared to have been designed for intimacy, with winding paths and secluded benches. But it had fallen into disrepair, with choked flower beds and crumbling stonework. That was the Empress Elizabeth's private garden, Müller explained when Konrad inquired. After her assassination, no one had the heart to maintain it. "The current Empress has shown no interest in gardening, so we've let it be." That evening, Konrad returned to his modest quarters in the servants' annex and wrote in his journal, "Found a forgotten place today. Like me, it waits for purpose again." The next morning, he approached Müller with a request, "Allow me to restore the eastern garden. In my own time, after my regular duties." The head gardener frowned. "It would require approval from the palace steward." "Then please ask for it. The garden deserves to live again." Permission was grudgingly granted, and Konrad began spending his evenings and early mornings in the abandoned plot. He cleared the weeds, repaired the paths, and prepared the soil for new plantings. He worked with a purpose that surprised even Müller, who began to recognize the skill behind Konrad's quiet demeanor. One misty morning in May, as Konrad was setting out new rose bushes, a woman's voice startled him. "You're changing everything." He turned to see a slender figure in a simple blue dress, her dark hair arranged without the elaborate styling of court fashion. Only her perfect posture and the quality of her clothing betrayed her rank. Konrad immediately dropped to one knee, head bowed. "Your Imperial Highness. Forgive me for disturbing your privacy. Rise, gardener. I've been watching your work from my chambers." Empress Sophia gestured to the palace wing that overlooked the garden. "This place has been dead for years. Why resurrect it now?" Konrad stood but kept his gaze respectfully lowered. "Because beautiful things shouldn't be abandoned, Your Highness." Something in his tone made her study him more carefully. "You speak as though you know something of abandonment." "Everyone knows something of it, Your Highness. Even empresses, I imagine." Her eyes widened slightly at his boldness. "You overstep, gardener." "Then I beg your forgiveness." She should have walked away, should have reported his impertinence. Instead, she asked, "What are you planting?" Roses, Your Highness. Varieties that bloom at different times, so the garden will have color from spring until late autumn. Show me. And so began the strangest of relationships. Each morning, before the court awoke, Empress Sophia would visit the eastern garden, and Conrad would explain his work. He showed her the white alba roses that would open first, followed by the pink bourbons and the deep red gallicas. He taught her the language of roses, how white symbolized innocence, pink stood for gratitude, and red proclaimed love. Their conversations were formal, proper, a sovereign speaking with a servant. But as May turned to June and the first buds began to open, something shifted. My sister-in-law, the late Empress Elizabeth, loved white roses, Sophia remarked one morning. The court still speaks of her constantly. Her beauty, her spirit. I am forever in her shadow. White roses are indeed beautiful, Conrad replied, carefully pruning a climbing variety. But they show every blemish, every insect's touch. Sometimes the ones with deeper colors have more resilience. Sophia watched his hands work deftly with the pruning shears. You have a philosopher's mind for a gardener. And you have a gardener's curiosity for an empress. She almost smiled, almost. The imperial chamberlain would have you dismissed for such familiarity. Then I am fortunate he sleeps late. In the formal world of the Habsburg court, these dawn conversations became Sophia's only taste of normalcy. Conrad never treated her with the suffocating deference of the courtiers, nor did he scheme for her favor. He simply spoke to her as one human to another, while his hands coaxed beauty from the soil. One morning in late June, she arrived to find Conrad absent. Instead, on the stone bench where she usually sat, lay a small book of botanical illustrations with a pressed rose serving as a bookmark. Beneath it was a note in a careful hand, ** Your Imperial Highness ***, I am called away to assist at the Laxenburg Summer Palace for 3 days. In my absence, please accept this modest guide to the roses of Europe. The yellow Austrians on page 27 would thrive in the western corner of your garden, should you wish to consider them. ***, Your obedient servant ***, Conrad Gartner ***, Sophia found herself strangely disappointed by his absence. She took the book to her chambers and spent the evening studying the illustrations, particularly the yellow Austrian roses he had mentioned. When had the garden become hers in his mind? And why did that presumption not offend her? During Conrad's absence, court life felt even more stifling. The endless receptions, the political maneuverings, the thinly veiled criticisms of her failure to produce an heir after 3 years of marriage. Sophia endured it all with the rigid composure expected of a Habsburg empress, but each night, she retreated to the Book of Roses, finding solace in its pages. On the 4th morning, she hurried to the garden earlier than usual, only to find Conrad kneeling by a new bed, already working. He rose immediately at her approach. Your Imperial Highness. Gardener. She tried to keep her voice neutral. I see you've returned. Yes, Your Highness. Laxenburg required less attention than expected. She handed him the book. Your guide was most educational. Did you find the Austrian yellows to your liking? I did. Their resilience in harsh conditions is admirable. Something passed between them, an understanding that transcended their positions. Conrad nodded slowly. I've taken the liberty of preparing a bed for them, with Your Highness's permission. Granted, she said softly. As summer progressed, the garden transformed under Conrad's care and Sophia's increasingly specific requests. She began bringing architectural sketches and paintings of gardens from the imperial collection, discussing with Conrad how elements might be incorporated into their project. The garden became an expression of something neither could name, something dangerous and impossible. In July, disaster nearly struck. The imperial chamberlain, Count Esterhazy, a man who guarded court protocol with religious fervor, came upon Sophia and Conrad deep in conversation over a new planting scheme. The Empress's lady-in-waiting, Countess Thun, had fallen asleep on a nearby bench, failing in her duty as chaperone. Your Imperial Highness. Esterhazy's scandalized voice cut through their discussion. This is most irregular. Sophia straightened, instantly transforming from an enthusiastic gardening student to the imperial figure. Count Esterhazy, I am inspecting the progress of the restoration. Is that not a suitable occupation for an empress? Without proper attendance. Speaking directly with a gardener. He infused the word with contempt. There are protocols, Your Highness. The Emperor would not approve. Then perhaps we should ask him, Sophia replied coolly. Shall we disturb his morning briefing with the Prime Minister to inquire whether I may discuss rose varieties? Esterhazy paled slightly. That won't be necessary, Your Highness. But I must insist that future inspections follow proper protocol. Court gardeners report to the head gardener, who reports to the palace steward, who may then relay my wishes after suitable delay and distortion. Sophia's voice remained calm, but her eyes flashed. The garden was forgotten, Count. I have chosen to resurrect it, and I will oversee its progress as I see fit. The chamberlain bowed stiffly. As Your Highness wishes. But the gardener should remember his place. After he departed, Conrad kept his eyes on the ground. Perhaps I should continue my work elsewhere, Your Highness. I would not wish to cause you difficulty. Look at me, Herr Gardener. When he raised his eyes, she said quietly, This garden is the only place in the palace where I can breathe. I will not surrender it to Esterhazy's protocols. Even so, we must be more careful. Yes, she agreed, though neither acknowledged what they were being careful about. That evening, Conrad received a summons to the head gardener's office. Muller looked uncomfortable as he delivered the message, The palace steward has ordered that you be reassigned to the outer parklands. Effective immediately. Conrad felt a cold weight settle in his chest. May I ask why? It seems you've attracted unwanted attention. The eastern garden will be completed by other staff, under proper supervision. I see. Conrad's voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. And if I refuse? Muller's eyebrows shot up. Then you'll be dismissed without reference. Don't be foolish, Gardener. One doesn't challenge the imperial chamberlain. Of course. I'll gather my tools in the morning. But that night, Conrad wrote a letter, a breach of every protocol, a risk to his position and reputation. He wrote of the garden, of the specific care each new planting would require, of the vision he and the Empress had developed together. He sealed it with a drop of wax pressed with a rose stem, and before dawn, he slipped it beneath a particular stone on the garden path where Sophia often paused. For 3 days, Conrad worked in the distant parklands, wondering if his letter had been found, wondering if she had read it or burned it unread. On the 4th morning, as he was trimming a windbreak hedge far from the palace, a royal page approached. Herr Gardener? You're wanted at the eastern garden. Heart-pounding, Conrad followed the boy back toward the palace. As they approached the garden, he saw a small gathering, the palace steward, the head gardener, and several court officials he didn't recognize. And standing among them, regal in a formal day dress, was Empress Sophia. Ah, Gardener, the palace steward called. Her Imperial Highness has questions about the garden design that the other gardeners cannot answer. You will explain your work. Conrad bowed deeply to the assembled group, then turned to Sophia. Your Imperial Highness honors me with her interest. Sophia's face remained impassive, though something in her eyes sparked. The palace steward informs me that you've been reassigned. Yet this garden remains unfinished. Regrettably so, Your Highness. I find that unacceptable. This project was undertaken at my request, and I wish it completed by the hand that began it. She turned to the steward. Herr Gardener will return to the eastern garden at once. The steward bowed stiffly. As Your Highness commands. After the officials departed, Sophia lingered, inspecting a white rose bush while her lady-in-waiting kept a proper distance. When Conrad approached to answer an ostensible question about pruning, she murmured, Your letter was most illuminating, Herr Gardener. Particularly the passage about gardens requiring both sun and shadow to thrive. I hope I did not overstep, Your Highness. You did, of course. But sometimes overstepping leads to better pathways. She touched a white blossom lightly. The feast of St. Leopold approaches. The court will celebrate at Laxenburg for 3 days. The palace here will be quieter. With that cryptic remark, she departed, leaving Conrad to wonder at her meaning. During the feast of St. Leopold, as the court indeed relocated to the summer palace, Conrad worked feverishly in the eastern garden. He installed a small fountain, planted the yellow Austrian roses, and created a secluded arbor draped with climbing varieties. On the second evening, as dusk fell, he was arranging lanterns along the paths when he heard footsteps. Sophia stood at the garden entrance, dressed simply, without the usual entourage. "I dismissed my ladies for the evening," she said, answering his unspoken question. "As far as the remaining staff knows, I am resting with a headache." "Your Highness takes a great risk." "Less than you might think. The Emperor has not visited my chambers in over a year." A shadow crossed her face. "Our marriage exists for the court, not for ourselves." Conrad wanted to reach for her but kept his distance. "I've created something to show you. If you'll allow me." He guided her to the newly finished arbor, where dozens of lanterns cast a warm glow over a small table set with tea and delicate pastries. Sophia's breath caught at the sight. "It's beautiful, Conrad." It was the first time she had used his given name. They sat together in the lantern light, speaking not as Empress and Gardener but as Sophia and Conrad. She told him of her childhood in a minor noble family, her unexpected marriage to Archduke Karl, the Emperor's nephew, and the crushing weight of imperial expectations. He spoke of his family's farm in Styria, his service in the cavalry, and the battle injury that left him with a trembling hand and nightmares. "After Konigratz, I couldn't bear the sounds of the city," he explained. "Too many echoes of artillery. So I turned to gardening. In the soil, things grow instead of die." "And now you're trapped in another kind of service," Sophia said softly. "Not trapped." His eyes met hers. "For the first time since the war, I found purpose again." As the night deepened around their lantern-lit sanctuary, Sophia reached across the table and placed her hand atop his, the first time they had touched. The contact, simple as it was, sent electricity through them both. "In another life," she whispered, "what would we be to each other?" "Everything," he answered. She withdrew her hand slowly. "But in this life?" "In this life, I am honored to create beauty for you to enjoy." When she finally returned to the palace, something had shifted between them, a boundary crossed that could never be uncrossed, though they had done nothing more transgressive than speak honestly and touch hands. The autumn brought new tensions. Emperor Franz Joseph announced a state visit by the Russian Tsar, and Schönbrunn Palace became a flurry of preparations. Sophia was required at endless planning meetings, costume fittings, and protocol briefings. Her morning visits to the garden grew shorter, less frequent, though each one sustained her through the tedium of imperial duties. Conrad, sensing the distant circumstances forced between them, poured his feelings into the garden. He planted chrysanthemums and late-blooming roses in Sophia's favorite colors. He carved her initial, a delicate S, into a stone hidden beneath a bench where only she would find it. And he began writing again, not letters, but poetry, verses he never intended her to see. The night before the Tsar's arrival, Sophia escaped to the garden, desperate for solitude. She found Conrad working by lamplight, setting glass cloches over delicate plants to protect them from the coming frost. "You should be resting, Your Highness," he said, rising to bow. "Tomorrow will be demanding. I needed to see this place once more before the circus begins." She looked exhausted, the weight of the empire visibly pressing on her shoulders. "For the next week, I'll be a decorative puppet, smiling and nodding while men decide the fate of nations." Conrad wanted to comfort her but maintained the proper distance. "The garden will wait for you, Your Highness." "Will it?" Her voice held an edge of bitterness. "Nothing waits in this world. Everything changes, decays, disappears." She gestured to the palace. "This empire is dying, Conrad. Everyone knows it but pretends otherwise." "Some things endure," he said quietly. "Not empires, perhaps. But other things." "What things?" Beauty. Truth. He hesitated. Love. The word hung between them, dangerous and undeniable. Sophia's eyes widened, then filled with tears she refused to shed. I should return to the palace. Of course, Your Highness. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small leather-bound book protruding from Conrad's work jacket. What's that? He hesitated. Nothing important. Show me. Reluctantly, he handed her the journal. She opened it to find page after page of poetry, verses about gardens and seasons, about resilience and hope, about a woman whose eyes contained universes. They were love poems, though they never named their subject. Sophia read in silence, her hands trembling slightly. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. You write beautifully. Words are poor substitutes for what cannot be said. Keep this safe, she whispered, returning the journal. If it were found. I understand. She left without another word, and Conrad wondered if he had ruined everything. The Russian delegation arrived with grand ceremony. For 5 days, Schönbrunn Palace hosted balls, hunts, concerts, and diplomatic meetings. Sophia performed her role flawlessly, drawing admiration from the Tsar himself. Conrad caught glimpses of her only from afar, radiant in court dress, smiling her practiced smile, every inch the imperial consort. On the delegation's final day, a grand tour of the palace gardens was scheduled. Court officials, diplomats, and royalty would process through Schönbrunn's famous grounds, with explanations provided by the head gardener. Conrad was assigned to stand with other gardeners along the route, silent and decorative in freshly laundered uniforms. As the procession approached the eastern section, Conrad stood at attention, eyes forward. Empress Sophia walked beside the Tsar, nodding as Herr Müller described the formal parterres and sculpture arrangements. When they reached the entrance to the restored garden, Sophia paused. If your Imperial Majesty would indulge me, she said to the Tsar, this garden holds special significance. I would like to guide this portion of the tour myself. The Tsar, charmed by his hostess, readily agreed. The Imperial Chamberlain looked startled but could hardly object. Sophia led the group into the garden, which bloomed with autumn splendor despite the season. This space was once the private retreat of Empress Elizabeth, she explained. After her tragic death, it fell into disrepair until recently. She proceeded to describe the garden's features with surprising technical detail, the varieties of roses, the principles of design, the considerations of light and shadow. The diplomats nodded politely, though most seemed bored by horticultural minutiae. Only the Tsar appeared genuinely interested. You speak with great knowledge, Your Imperial Highness, he commented. Did you design this yourself? I had assistants, Sophia replied. Then, to the visible horror of the Chamberlain, she turned to Conrad. This gardener is primarily responsible for the restoration. His knowledge of roses is unparalleled. All eyes turned to Conrad, who bowed deeply, his face burning with embarrassment and pride. Perhaps he could explain the particular roses you've chosen, the Tsar suggested, more out of politeness than interest. Before the Chamberlain could intervene, Sophia nodded. An excellent suggestion, Your Imperial Majesty. Herr Gartner, please show us the Austrian yellow varieties. Conrad stepped forward, acutely aware of the impropriety of the situation, yet unable to refuse an imperial command. As he led the group to the yellow roses, he spoke with quiet authority about their characteristics and care. The Tsar asked several questions, which Conrad answered with precision and respect. You're fortunate to have such knowledgeable staff, the Tsar remarked to Sophia as they moved on. In Russia, we must import our garden experts from France and England. After the tour concluded, Conrad expected severe repercussions for his unusual prominence. Instead, he was summoned to the palace steward's office and informed that the Tsar had been so impressed by the eastern garden that he wished something similar for his summer residence. Conrad was being granted a temporary assignment to St. Petersburg in the spring, to consult on the project. It's a great honor, the steward said, clearly puzzled by the turn of events. Though why the Tsar would be impressed by a simple gardener is beyond my understanding. Conrad left the office in a daze. the assignment would take him away from Schönbrunn, away from Sophia, for months. Was this her way of removing temptation? Or was it the Chamberlain's scheme to separate them permanently? That evening, a palace page delivered a note to Conrad's quarters, *the glass house at midnight. Tell no one. The imperial glass houses were vast structures of iron and glass, housing exotic specimens from across the empire. At night, they were locked and unattended, a perfect place for a clandestine meeting. Conrad slipped from his quarters at 11:30, using his gardener's knowledge to avoid the night patrols. He entered the glass house through a service door and made his way to the central palm house, where tropical plants created a jungle-like atmosphere even in winter. Sophia was already there, wearing a simple dark dress and cloak that helped her blend with the shadows. When Conrad approached, she pressed a finger to her lips and led him deeper into the foliage, where the sound of running water from an ornamental stream would mask their conversation. "You're being sent to Russia," she said without preamble. "Yes, Your Highness." "At the Tsar's request?" "At my arrangement." She held his gaze steadily. "I spoke privately with the Tsar about your exceptional talents. He was eager to secure your services." Conrad felt as if he'd been struck. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to be safe." Her composure cracked slightly. "Count Esterhazy has begun asking questions about the Eastern Garden, about why I take such interest in it. There are rumors, Conrad." "Rumors without foundation," he protested. "We've done nothing improper." "Haven't we?" Her voice was soft. "What we've done may not be physical, but it is no less real. And in the Habsburg court, perception is everything." Conrad struggled to understand. "So you're sending me away to protect your reputation? To protect us both?" She reached for his hand. "I've arranged for you to stay in Russia until autumn. By then, the court will have moved on to fresher gossip. You can return when it's safer." "And if I refuse?" "Please don't." Her fingers tightened around his. "I couldn't bear it if you were disgraced because of me." Conrad wanted to argue, to insist he could weather whatever storms came. But he saw the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for him, and relented. "As you wish, Your Highness." "Sophia," she whispered. "Here, now, I am only Sophia." In the humid darkness of the glass house, surrounded by plants from distant lands, they stood closer than propriety would ever allow. Conrad raised her hand to his lips, a courtly gesture transformed by their solitude into something deeply intimate. "I'll go to Russia," he said against her fingers. "But I'll write to you." "You can't. Every letter to the Empress is read by secretaries." "Not every letter." He smiled slightly. Botanical correspondences from Russian imperial gardeners to the head gardener at Schönbrunn would hardly merit scrutiny. A flicker of hope crossed her face. "You would risk it?" "For you, I would risk far more." Winter descended on Vienna, and Conrad prepared for his Russian assignment. He spent his final weeks at Schönbrunn winterizing the gardens and training another gardener to maintain the eastern sanctuary during his absence. He saw Sophia only at a distance, during formal occasions when she appeared in the gardens with visitors or ladies-in-waiting. On his last evening, Conrad walked alone to the eastern garden. Snow covered the paths, and the roses were dormant, their thorny branches stark against the white ground. He stood by the arbor where they had shared tea and truths, and felt the weight of impending separation. "I wondered if you would come here tonight." He turned to find Sophia at the garden entrance, bundled in furs, her breath visible in the cold air. A single lady-in-waiting stood at a discreet distance, pretending great interest in the snow-covered statuary. "I leave for St. Petersburg in the morning, Your Highness." "I know." She approached slowly, her boots crunching on the frozen path. "I came to wish you safe travels." "Thank you, Your Highness." They stood in silence, the propriety of their words at odds with the emotion in their eyes. Finally, Sophia reached into her fur muff and withdrew a small package. "A token for your journey," she said, loudly enough for her lady to hear. Then, more softly, "Open it when you're alone." Conrad accepted the package with a deep bow. You honor me, your highness. Serve the Tsar well, Herr Gardner. Your emperor expects no less. With that, she turned and glided away, disappearing into the snowy dusk like an apparition. Later, in his quarters, Conrad unwrapped the package to find a small leather case containing a gold pocket watch. Inside the cover was an inscription, *Time passes, but gardens remain. Conrad departed for Russia the next morning, carrying the watch close to his heart. St. Petersburg was a city of startling contrasts, imperial grandeur alongside desperate poverty, Western European aspirations married to distinctly Russian traditions. Conrad found himself housed in comfortable quarters on the grounds of the Tsar's summer palace, treated with surprising respect as an Austrian specialist rather than a mere gardener. True to his word, he began writing to Sophia through the guise of professional correspondence. His letters to Herr Müller included extensive details about Russian gardening practices, interspersed with coded messages only Sophia would understand. He wrote of a white rose that reminded him of a conversation about resilience, of a hidden stone bench where he'd inscribed an initial, of lanterns that illuminated truth in darkness. Sophia's replies, ostensibly from Müller, were masterpieces of subterfuge. Among discussions of fertilizer shipments and grafting techniques were references to poetry, to shared memories, to a garden that awaited his return. Each letter sustained Conrad through the Russian winter, which seemed to stretch endlessly. In March, as ice still gripped the Neva River, Conrad received an urgent communication from Vienna. Emperor Franz Joseph's nephew, Archduke Karl, Sophia's husband, had died suddenly of pneumonia. The court was in mourning, and all non-essential correspondence was suspended until further notice. Conrad read the news with shock and conflicting emotions. The Archduke had been a distant figure in Sophia's life, more political partner than husband, yet his death would cause her genuine grief and upheaval. And what would it mean for her position at court? For her future? For them? For 3 months, Conrad heard nothing from Vienna. He threw himself into his work, creating an Eastern-inspired garden for the Tsar that earned lavish praise. By June, the Russian court was buzzing with rumors that Conrad would be offered a permanent position, with a title and estate, an unprecedented honor for a foreign gardener. Then, finally, a letter arrived from Herr Müller. The handwriting was different, not Sophia's disguised script, but Müller's actual hand. It contained only professional information about the gardens at Schönbrunn, with a postscript noting that Her Imperial Highness, the Dowager Archduchess, has relocated to the summer palace at Bad Ischl for extended mourning. Conrad felt cold dread wash over him. Sophia had not written herself. She had moved to a distant palace. The court had assigned her the title of Dowager, suggesting she would not remarry. Had she decided that their connection, inappropriate even before, was impossible to maintain now? For weeks, Conrad debated what to do. His assignment in Russia would end in September, but the Tsar's offer of permanent employment grew more explicit with each passing day. A life of relative privilege awaited him in Russia, far more than he could ever achieve in Austria. Yet the thought of never seeing Sophia again was unbearable. In late July, Conrad made his decision. He respectfully declined the Tsar's generous offer, citing family obligations in Austria. Preparations were made for his return to Vienna in August, ahead of schedule. The journey back was arduous, a sea voyage followed by trains and carriages, but Conrad barely noticed the discomfort. His mind was fixed on what awaited him. Would Sophia still be at Bad Ischl? Would she welcome his return or consider it an unwelcome complication? He arrived in Vienna to find Schönbrunn Palace quieter than he remembered. The court remained primarily at the summer residences, with only essential staff maintaining the main palace. Herr Müller received Conrad with genuine pleasure, impressed by the skills he had developed in Russia. "You've been requested at Bad Ischl," Müller informed him after reviewing his Russian drawings. "The Dowager Archduchess is undertaking renovations of the gardens there and has specifically asked for your expertise." Conrad's heart leapt. "When am I to depart?" "Tomorrow, if you're not too exhausted from your travels. The mountain air will refresh you after St. Petersburg's dampness." The next morning, Conrad boarded a train for Bad Ischl, the imperial retreat nestled in the Alps. As the train climbed into the mountains, leaving Vienna's summer heat behind, he wondered what he would find. Had Sophia changed in their year apart? Had her husband's death hardened or softened her? Did she still feel what had grown between them in the Eastern Garden? Bad Ischl Palace was smaller than Schönbrunn but no less magnificent, with its yellow Habsburg facade nestled among alpine meadows and forests. Conrad presented himself to the palace steward, who informed him that the Dowager Archduchess was walking in the lower gardens and had left instructions for him to join her there. Conrad followed a winding path through formal parterres until he reached a small bridge over a rushing stream. On the other side stood Sophia, dressed in the lavender of second-stage mourning rather than black, her dark hair simply arranged. She was alone, a surprising breach of protocol, even in the relative seclusion of Bad Ischl. When she saw him, she remained perfectly still. Conrad crossed the bridge slowly, stopping at a respectful distance before bowing deeply. "Your Imperial Highness." "Herr Gardner." Her voice was controlled, revealing nothing. "I trust your journey from Russia was uneventful." "Yes, Your Highness." "Walk with me. There are aspects of the garden I wish to discuss." They moved along the stream, maintaining a proper distance, speaking of inconsequential matters, the Russian garden designs, the Bad Ischl soil conditions, the unusual alpine plants. Only when they reached a secluded clearing, screened by tall pines, did Sophia's composure falter. "I didn't write," she said softly. "After Karl died, I couldn't find words." "There was no need, Your Highness." "I understood." "Did you?" "I barely understood myself." She turned to face him fully. "My husband's death freed me from a political marriage but placed me in a different kind of prison. As Dowager Archduchess, I am expected to live in dignified seclusion, a living monument to Habsburg loyalty." Conrad heard the bitterness in her voice. "Is that why you came to Bad Ischl? For seclusion?" "I came to Bad Ischl because it's mine." A spark of her old determination flashed in her eyes. "Karl left me this estate outright, not as imperial property. Here, I answer to no one but myself." Conrad began to understand. "And the garden renovations?" "A pretext to bring you here, where we can speak freely." She stepped closer, close enough that propriety would object. "I spent a year in mourning, not just for Karl, but for possibilities. For choices I never had." "And now?" Conrad hardly dared breathe. "Now I am making a choice." She reached for his hand, an act of breathtaking boldness. "I will never be empress. Franz Joseph has named another nephew as heir. But I have this place, this freedom, small as it is." Conrad looked down at their joined hands, the gardener's, calloused and strong, the Archduchess's, soft but equally determined. "What are you saying, Sophia?" "I'm saying that Bad Ischl needs a head gardener. Someone with exceptional knowledge of roses." Her eyes held his. "Someone who understands that gardens need both sun and shadow to thrive." Conrad felt a lifetime of barriers falling away. The court would never accept, the court is in Vienna. "We are here." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not proposing anything scandalous, Conrad. I'm offering you a position, a home, and time. Time to see what might grow between us without the weight of the empire pressing down. People will talk. People always talk. But in Bad Ischl, surrounded by mountains instead of courtiers, we can hear ourselves instead." Conrad brought her hand to his lips, no longer merely a courtly gesture but a promise. "Then I accept, Your Highness. Both the position and the possibility." Sophia smiled, not the practiced smile of court functions but something real and radiant. The Eastern Garden at Schönbrunn will always be where this began. But here, we can create something new. "Together," Conrad said. "Together," she agreed. And so the gardener who had planted roses in an abandoned garden found himself planting a future instead, one that would bloom slowly, carefully, in the shadow of the Habsburg Empire but not confined by it. In the years that followed, the gardens of Bad Ischl became famous throughout Europe, drawing visitors who marveled at their beauty and whispered about the unusual friendship between the Dowager Archduchess and her head gardener. Few knew the truth, that within those gardens, among the roses he had taught her to love, an empress had found not just beauty but the courage to choose her own path. And a gardener who had lost himself in war had found his way back through love.